Hello, CAC. I'm so happy to see you. We're back. We're here for another semester after winter break, and we're going to spend some time talking about classical music and the composers that create it. Now, I think classical, just the term itself, can be a little bit confusing because when we talk about music history, so like the different times in history when music was written, one of those time periods is called classical. And then when we talk about music written for orchestras, usually kind of intricate, complicated pieces that use lots of different classical instruments, that is also a type of music, a genre of music called classical. Now that's what we're going to be talking about today. So all of these different composers that I'm speaking about in the next few weeks all come from this genre, this style of music called classical. And we think of instruments that are usually not electronic. So things like the violin, things like the cello, a lot of brass instruments, a lot of drums, different types of instruments that have been around for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years in different versions. So classical music, when we're talking about it specifically, it kind of came from sacred music or spiritual music, music written for churches and to be played in big groups. Side note, there's construction going on, so if you hear that in the background, just ignore it. I'm trying to. So today we're going to speak about a specific classical composer during the Baroque period. Can you guys say Baroque? It sounds kind of like a frog, ribbit, right? Baroque. And that was a time period between 1600 and 1750. So it all ended before we got to the American Revolutionary War. So this time period is way, way, way back. We're going to talk about Johann Sebastian Bach. He's a German composer, okay? And he lived a long time ago. It's this middle dude with a wig right there. And he wrote a lot of classical music. But why is he important? What's interesting about him? Let's talk about him. So when Johann Sebastian Bach was a kid, he grew up in a family that had all been musicians. A lot of people in his family had been composers and musicians for hundreds of years, like his grandparents and great-grandparents. So many people, over 300 years of musicians come before him in Bach's family. Now, when Johann Sebastian Bach, when he was a kid, when he was about 6, his parents were very sick, and by the time he was 10, both of his parents had passed away, so he was an orphan, and he went to live with his older brother. Now, they lived in Germany, and Bach worked with his brother, who was an organist. He played an organ, which is a great big piano-style instrument. Like the way you play it is kind of like a piano keyboard, but it's got those big pipes, and it's lots and lots of sound, lots of air goes into them, and it's a complicated instrument. But he learned how to play that from his brother. He even learned how to fix organs. So he was really, really good with the organ and several other instruments. Now, in his life, Johann Sebastian Bach worked on lots of different instruments and learned about lots of different types of music combinations. Now, there were lots of different ways that you could play music. The orchestra itself during this time, so when you would go and see an orchestra play, it was a lot of string instruments. That's this yellow part, like if you were sitting in the audience. Then you have up in here the woodwinds, so things like the oboe or the recorder. Those instruments here, flutes, and then you had a little bit of brass, like a trumpet, and then you had percussion, like the timpani, great big drums that made a lot of sound. And he learned how to write music for all of those types of instruments, as well as voices and things that we may not play often now, like the harpsichord, which is kind of like a piano. And he learned how to write different groupings of music. He was really famous for writing concertos. Can you say concerto? It's an Italian word, and it's this idea of writing music that has lots of different solos. So you might have a group of instruments or even an orchestra, and certain instruments are highlighted at different points, and they have solos. That's called a concerto rather than a solo, okay? And he wrote lots and lots of music. He worked for a duke, then he worked for a prince, and then he became like the head of music at a school. So he was a teacher of music for a really long time, and he wrote tons and tons of pieces of music, lots and lots of different orchestrated pieces that we didn't know about. He was just a regular musician. In fact, he would write music for a small group of musicians that hung out at a coffee shop, and they would just play. He was just a regular guy. Until after he had passed away, almost 100 years later, a different musician and composer, Felix Mendelssohn, found a bunch of his music and pulled it out and put it together and performed it like he led that music that Bach wrote. And it was really good and people really liked it. So a lot of his music didn't become famous until after he had passed away. So it's kind of unique. And he was really good at this style of musicianship called counterpoint. And that's kind of a weird word, but rather than just having like one line of music that you can hear really, really specifically and you can kind of hum along to, counterpoint is this idea of lots of different things happening at once. And so like one instrument playing a whole different part of music and a different line that sounds one way, and another part that does something totally different, and they kind of go over each other, but it sounds good. It doesn't sound like they're clashing. And he was really good at writing music styles like that. So today you are going to listen to the Brandenburg Concerto number 2, the first movement or the first part. And it's done by a small group of orchestrated musicians performing this piece. It's a little bit longer, and I want you to see if you can pick out some of the specific instruments being played. There's a violin, there's the oboe, there's the recorder, there's the trumpet, and a lot of different other instruments kind of playing in the background. So you're going to listen to that piece. Another thing that I have put in the list for you guys to watch, if you need a quick brush up and a refresher on the parts of an orchestra, I have a short video called George Meets the Orchestra, and it's this little boy in Australia getting to go and see the symphony there in Australia and meet musicians who play and all the parts, and all those musicians happen to be kids or teenagers, so that's pretty cool. And then the last piece I want you guys to watch is called The Evolution of Music. And it's actually by Pentatonics, that music group, a cappella group that we've listened to a few times before. We've listened to certain musicians from that group, like K.O. And why I want you to listen to it is because it starts with music from this time and even before. It's way, way, way before what we think of as modern classical music, with chants and very, very basic sounds. And then it moves on through history up to now. And while this video is from like 2013, so it's a little bit farther back in Pentatonics' time making music, it does a really good job of showing how vocals and just music styles as a whole have evolved and changed over time to adapt to what we like to hear today. Because we wouldn't have the music you guys enjoy and like to listen to now if we didn't have people like Johann Sebastian Bach to write some of the earlier pieces that our current music kind of comes from. So, to recap, you're going to listen to the concerto for Brandenburg number 2 by Johann Sebastian Bach, and then you're going to meet the orchestra, right, with George, and then you're going to listen to The Evolution of Music. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.